The judge extended his gloved hand, 6 shotguns trained on her back. Emma walked forward, the ledger heavy in her hands. She held it out. His smile widened. "Smart girl. You always did know your place." Emma's fingers touched his glove. Her voice came clear and cold. "My place is standing over your grave." She dropped. The double-barrel blast hit Judge Blackwood square in the chest. He flew backward, already dead. But this wasn't how it started. 3 months earlier, a terrified woman stepped off a train in Wyoming. She wasn't running from the law. She was running from something far worse, and she was about to discover that sometimes the only way to survive is to stop running and start fighting. The fire crackled in the stone pit, casting dancing shadows across the porch of the Colorado ranch house. Caleb Hartwell sat in his weathered rocking chair, a man of 70 winters, his beard more silver than black, now his hands bearing the scars of a lifetime lived hard. The night air carried the smell of pine and coming snow. Across from him, his grandson James perched on the porch rail, 15 years old and restless with youth. The boy wore a troubled expression, one that Caleb recognized. It was the look of a man about to walk into darkness, uncertain if he would return. James broke the silence. "Grandpa, were you ever really afraid?" The question hung in the cold air between them. Caleb stopped rocking. He looked into the fire, watching the flames consume the wood, seeing in them another fire from another lifetime. His hand moved unconsciously to his left shoulder, where beneath his shirt an old scar still ached when storms approached. "Once," Caleb said finally. His voice carried the weight of decades. "December of 1884, the night I met your grandmother." James shifted on the rail. "You mean when Grandma Emma arrived by train in Laramie?" A smile touched Caleb's weathered face, but there was no humor in it. "That wasn't the night I met her boy. That was the night she lied to me." The young man's eyes widened. In all his 15 years, he had never heard this story. His grandmother Emma was a woman of quiet strength, beloved in the valley, known for her kindness and her iron will. The thought of her lying seemed impossible. Caleb stood slowly, his joints protesting. He walked into the house, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. When he returned, he carried an old wooden box, its surface smooth from years of handling. He set it on the small table between them and opened the lid. Inside lay 3 objects: a spent bullet misshapen from impact, a piece of torn fabric brown with dried blood, and a letter yellowed with age, sealed with red wax. "This is how it really started," Caleb said. He picked up the bullet, held it to the firelight. The metal gleamed dully. "This piece of lead nearly ended everything before it began. Nearly took your grandmother from the world before she became your grandmother, before she became herself." James leaned forward, transfixed. "What happened?" Caleb settled back into his chair. The fire popped, sending a shower of sparks into the night sky. Somewhere in the darkness a coyote called. He closed his eyes and the years fell away like autumn leaves. "It started on a train platform in October. I was 34 years old, alone on a mountain for 7 years, and she stepped off that train looking like a frightened sparrow. But Sparrow's boy can be fiercer than hawks when pushed to the edge." He opened his eyes, looked at his grandson. "Let me tell you about the winter your grandmother stopped running and started fighting." The scene dissolved into memory, into the past, into the truth that had shaped everything that came after. The wind in Laramie didn't just blow, it hunted. It tore through the wooden buildings like a living thing, searching for warmth to steal, for hope to extinguish. On the platform of the train depot, Caleb Hartwell stood with his buffalo hide coat pulled tight, letting that wind tear at him without flinching. He was a man carved from the same granite as the mountains behind him, 6 feet 4 inches of weathered muscle and hard experience. His beard was thick and black, shot through with early gray. His eyes were the color of steel in winter. He pulled out his pocket watch, a gift from Martha engraved with words he could no longer bear to read. The Union Pacific was late. Again. Caleb wasn't a man given to nervousness, but his gloved hand tightened on the porch railing. 7 years. 7 winters alone in that cabin high in the Medicine Bow Range. 7 years since the fever took Martha and their infant son Thomas in the same brutal week. The silence of that cabin, once a comfort, had become a tomb where ghosts walked at night. He needed noise. He needed life, not love. Never love again. Just someone to keep the bread baked and the linens mended so he could focus on the work of staying alive. He had written to the bridal agency in St. Louis with specific requirements: sturdy, practical, devoid of romantic notions. The train's whistle cut through his thoughts, harsh and mournful. Black smoke belched into the gray October sky as the locomotive screeched into the station. Caleb scanned the passengers as they disembarked. Cattlemen in dusty coats, a trio of gamblers in pinstripes and silk vests. A Swedish family, the parents holding tight to their children's hands, faces full of equal parts hope and terror. Then he saw her. She stood alone by the luggage cart, the only passenger not moving with purpose. She didn't look sturdy. She didn't look practical. She looked like something the wind might carry away if it blew hard enough. Small, fragile, wrapped in a gray calico dress that had seen better years and a traveling cloak that had seen worse. But it was her eyes that stopped him. The color of honey in sunlight, ringed with red, as if she had been weeping for 1,000 miles. They darted constantly, scanning the platform, the station house, the sheriff standing by the telegraph office. The eyes of a hunted animal. Caleb's boots echoed on the wooden planks as he approached. "You'd be Miss Clara Allen." She jumped as if he'd fired a pistol, spun to face him, one hand clutching a small valise to her chest like a shield. Up close, she looked even younger. 22 at most. Her face was pale, her cheekbones sharp with recent hunger. A bruise faded to yellow marked her jaw beneath a careful application of powder. "Mr. Hartwell?" Her voice was barely audible over the hissing steam of the locomotive. "That's me." He studied her with the same careful attention he gave to tracking signs in the forest. Every detail told a story. The way she held herself, shoulders hunched as if expecting a blow. The quick, shallow breaths. The constant scanning of exits and faces. This woman was terrified. "You're smaller than the letter said." It was a rude thing to say. Caleb knew it even as the words left his mouth. But 7 years alone had stripped away his social graces like wind strips bark from a tree. Color flooded her pale cheeks. "I'm strong, Mr. Hartwell. I can work. I can cook and clean and mend. Please." The words came fast, desperate, tumbling over each other. "I'm ready to go. Now. Can we leave now?" She wasn't looking at him. Her gaze fixed on something over his shoulder. Caleb turned. The sheriff, a man named Brennan, stood by the telegraph office watching them. Recognition sparked in Caleb's gut. Brennan was in the pocket of the cattle barons. Everyone knew it. The man had stood by while Jacob's barn burned. "Where's your trunk?" Caleb asked, turning back to the woman. "Just this." She lifted the valise. Caleb narrowed his eyes. A mail-order bride traveling across half the country with nothing but a handbag. That was wrong. All wrong. Brides brought linens, heirlooms, the accumulated possessions of a life left behind. That's it. No trunk, no traveling chest. "I left in a hurry." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "The agency said you had everything I would need." She took a step toward him, and now there was something new in those honey-colored eyes. Desperation so raw it made Caleb's chest tighten. "Please, Mr. Hartwell, can we leave now before—" She caught herself, bit her lip. "Before the snow starts?" Caleb felt that old instinct prickle at the base of his neck. The same instinct that had kept him alive through 6 Sioux raids and a winter trapped by an avalanche. The same instinct that whispered warnings when a cougar stalked him through the high timber. Something was wrong with this woman. Dead wrong. But the contract was signed, the fee paid to the agency. $50 that represented 3 months of pelts. And looking at her thin shoulders shivering in the cutting wind, looking at that bruise half hidden by powder, Caleb knew one thing with absolute certainty. He couldn't leave her on this platform. "Wagon's out back," he said, reaching for her valise. She jerked it away, held it tighter. The bag was heavier than clothes should be. Much heavier. Caleb noticed but said nothing. "I can carry it," she said. "Suit yourself. Let's go before the weather turns." He led her around the station to where Thunder and Ash stood hitched to his supply wagon. The two gray geldings stamped their feet, eager to be moving. Caleb helped her onto the bench seat. Her hand in his was ice cold despite her gloves. As they pulled away from Laramie, Caleb risked one glance back. Sheriff Brennan stood on the platform watching them leave. The man touched his hat brim, a gesture that might have been courtesy but felt like a threat. The woman who called herself Clara Allen didn't look back once. The road from Laramie to Caleb's homestead was not a road so much as a suggestion carved by wagon wheels and stubbornness. 6 hours of climbing into the Medicine Bow Range following a track that would be impassable in another month when the deep snows came. The wagon rattled over frozen ruts, each jolt making the woman wince. For the first 2 hours, neither spoke. Caleb focused on the horses, on reading the sky, on watching for signs of early storm. The woman sat beside him, wrapped in a buffalo robe he'd tossed across her lap, her back rigid, not touching the seat, her eyes fixed on the horizon behind them, always behind them. Caleb counted 5 times she turned to look back down the mountain. 5 times her breath caught, as if she expected to see pursuit cresting the ridge. "You running from the law, girl?" The question hung in the thin mountain air. She flinched as if he'd struck her. "No, no, sir." "You keep looking back. Ain't nothing back there but prairie and distance. I've never seen mountains this big." She was lying. It was a bad lie delivered with the conviction of someone who had never learned to lie well. Caleb had played poker in Deadwood with Wild Bill Hickok before the man took a bullet to the back of the head. He knew a tell when he saw one. This woman was clenching her jaw so hard a muscle jumped in her cheek. He decided to push to test. "We get a lot of snow up here. Come December we'll be snowed in solid. 4 months sometimes without seeing another soul. No doctors, no sheriffs, no lawmen at all. Just you, me, and the trees." He watched her carefully. Most city women balked at that description. They imagined the isolation as a prison, the silence as a torment. Clara Allen relaxed. Her shoulders dropped an inch. Her grip on that mysterious valise loosened slightly. She took a deep breath of the pine-scented air. "Good," she whispered, so quiet he almost missed it. "That sounds safe?" "Not lonely. Not frightening. Safe." Caleb chewed the inside of his cheek. He knew that word knew its weight. Safe meant protection from something specific. Safe meant hiding. Safe from what? She turned to him then, and for just a moment he saw behind the fear. Saw intelligence. Saw calculation. Saw something hard as winter ice. From disappointment, Mr. Hartwell. From failing at yet another thing. Another lie, but this one better crafted. Caleb let it sit. He clicked his tongue, urged Thunder and Ash forward at a steady pace. The sun tracked across the sky, weak and watery. The temperature dropped as they climbed. At 7,000 feet, frost sparkled on the rocks beside the trail. At 8,000, patches of old snow appeared in the shadows. The mountains rose around them, vast and ancient, indifferent to human suffering. Caleb risked another question. "What's in the bag, Clara?" She pulled the valise onto her lap, wrapped her arms around it like a mother protecting a child. "My Bible and my mother's sewing kit." Heavy Bible. A pause. Then with a ghost of humor that surprised him, she said, "It's a family edition. Lot of sins to atone for." Despite himself, Caleb felt the corner of his mouth twitch. Almost a smile. He couldn't remember the last time he'd almost smiled. They rode on. The trail narrowed. On one side, the mountain rose sheer and unforgiving. On the other, a drop of 200 feet to a boulder-strewn ravine. Thunder and Ash were mountain-bred, sure-footed, but Caleb felt the woman tense beside him at every switchback. "You afraid of heights?" "No, sir." "Then what's got you so wound up?" She didn't answer. Instead, her eyes found something on the trail ahead. A small cabin abandoned, its roof caved in from some long-ago winter, just a shell of logs and shattered dreams. And something changed in her face. Not fear this time. Something else. Memory. Pain so deep it had carved channels in her soul. Caleb saw it happen. Saw her eyes go distant. Saw her breath quicken. saw her hand move to her wrist, fingers rubbing at something hidden beneath her sleeve. And he knew with the certainty of a man who had seen violence up close that this woman wore scars. The moment passed. She blinked, came back to herself. Caleb said nothing, but he filed the observation away, added it to the growing list of things that didn't add up about Clara Allen. The sun touched the peaks behind them, painting the world in shades of violet and deep blue. Shadows pooled in the valleys like spilled ink. And then around a final bend, his cabin came into view. It sat in a small clearing ringed by lodgepole pines, solid, built to withstand an avalanche, and had twice. Smoke curled from the stone chimney where he'd banked the fire before leaving that morning. The windows were shuttered against the cold. A creek half frozen sang its way past the eastern wall. To Caleb it was just shelter. To Clara, standing up in the wagon to see it better, it was apparently something more. "It's beautiful," she breathed, and for the first time since he'd seen her on that platform, the fear in her eyes dimmed, replaced by something profound, relief so intense it was almost physical. She sagged slightly as if strings had been cut. "How far is the next cabin?" she asked. 12 miles north. Old Jack Morrison's place. He's there winters." "And south?" "Nothing for 20 miles, then a mining camp, but it'll be closed for the season soon." She nodded slowly, taking this in. "So we're alone here." "Yes, ma'am. Alone as two people can be." She closed her eyes. A single tear tracked down her cheek. "Thank God." Caleb helped her down from the wagon. She stood in the clearing, breathing deeply of the thin mountain air. At this elevation, 10,000 feet, every breath burned cold in the lungs. But she didn't seem to mind. She turned in a slow circle, taking in the dark forest, the steep slopes, the narrow trail that was the only way in or out. Most women would see a prison. She saw sanctuary. Inside, the warmth hit them immediately. The banked fire had kept the main room comfortable. Caleb lit kerosene lamps, casting long shadows against the log walls. The cabin was simple but solid. One large room serving as kitchen, dining, and living area. A bedroom partitioned off with a heavy curtain. A loft above for storage. Everything built by Caleb's hands over the course of 2 hard years. Clara moved through the space slowly, not critiquing, which surprised him. City women usually had opinions about frontier living, about the lack of proper furniture, about the dust and the roughness, and the 100 small inconveniences of life without servants or stores. But Clara didn't complain. She walked to the window, checked the latch. Her fingers traced the heavy iron bolt. Then she moved to the door, examined the thick oak bar that could be dropped into place to seal them inside. "Does that lock hold?" she asked. Her first question about the cabin, and it was about security. A grizzly couldn't break through it. Good. She reached up and dropped the bar into place with a heavy thud. The sound echoed in the small space. Final. Definitive. The sound of a door closing on the outside world. Caleb felt a strange sensation in his chest. Unease, maybe, or recognition. This woman wasn't just seeking shelter from a storm. She was fortifying against a siege. He moved to the stove, began preparing a meal. Venison stew from meat he'd hung 2 days prior. Cornbread made from a mix of meal and sourdough starter he'd kept alive for 6 years. Simple food, but hot and filling. They ate at the rough-hewn table in silence. Clara picked at her stew, her hands trembling so badly the spoon rattled against the tin plate. She took small bites, chewing slowly, as if her stomach had forgotten how to process food. Under the lamplight, Caleb could see more details. A healing cut on her lower lip. Shadows under her eyes so deep they looked like bruises. Her wrists, when her sleeves pulled back slightly, bore ring-shaped marks. Old marks, faded, but unmistakable. Rope burns. No, something else. Something circular. They finished the meal. Caleb cleared the plates, set them in the wash basin. The silence stretched, grew heavy with unspoken expectations. They were married legally. The proxy papers had been signed before she ever boarded that train in St. Louis. In the eyes of the law and God, Clara Allen was his wife. And a wedding night carried certain expectations. Caleb wasn't a brute. He had loved Martha with a fierce tenderness that made her memory ache even now. But he was a man with needs, a man who had lived alone too long, and he had paid good money for a wife, not a silent ghost, to haunt his cabin. Yet looking at Clara, seeing how she sat with her back straight, her muscles tense, her eyes fixed on the door as if expecting it to burst open at any moment, he felt more like a jailer than a husband. He cleared his throat. "There's water in the basin if you want to wash up. Bed's in the corner." The words fell like stones into still water. Clara froze. Her fork halfway to her mouth clattered onto the tin plate with a sound like a gunshot. Color drained from her face, leaving her white as the snow outside. Her breathing went shallow and quick. For a long moment she didn't move, didn't speak, just stared at the plate in front of her as if it held all the answers to questions she couldn't ask. Then so quietly he almost missed it. She said, "Mr. Hartwell? Caleb?" She looked up, met his eyes. "I need to tell you something before we do anything." Caleb leaned back in his chair, crossed his massive arms. "I'm listening." "I can't be a wife to you tonight." The words hung in the air between them. Outside, the wind picked up, moaning around the cabin's corners. The fire crackled. Somewhere in the forest, a wolf howled. Caleb's eyes narrowed. "You sick?" "No." "Monthly trouble?" "No." "Then what is it, Clara?" His voice hardened despite his best intentions. "I paid $50 for a wife. I didn't pay for a roommate." She flinched at his tone but didn't look away, and Caleb saw something shift in her expression. The fear was still there, but underneath it, something else was rising, something hard and bright and desperate. She stood. The chair scraped loud against the floorboards, walked to where she'd set that mysterious valise by the door. Caleb's hand moved instinctively under the table to where he kept a loaded revolver. Every muscle in his body tensed. But she didn't pull a weapon. She pulled out a book. Leather bound thick as a man's fist, the edges of its pages darkened with handling. She carried it back to the table, set it down between them with a thud. Not a Bible. Something else. Something that made her hands shake as she placed it. "I didn't come here to marry you, Caleb Hartwell." Her voice had changed. No longer the frightened whisper of the woman on the train platform. Something harder now. Colder. The voice of someone who had looked into darkness and come back changed. "I came here because in 3 territories you're known as the best shot with a Winchester rifle." Caleb stared at her, then at the book, then back at her. "What the hell are you talking about?" Clara, if that was even her real name, placed both hands flat on the table, leaned forward, and spoke words that would change everything. "I'm not Clara Allen. My name is Emma Blackwood, and 3 weeks ago I killed the son of the governor of Montana." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the fire seemed to stop crackling. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Caleb sat frozen, his mind trying to process what he'd just heard. Emma Blackwood. Blackwood. The name hit him like a fist to the gut. "Blackwood," he repeated slowly. "Kin to Judge Howard Blackwood. His daughter-in-law. I was married to his son Daniel for 3 years. Caleb stood so fast his chair toppled backward, crashed to the floor. His face went red, then white. His hands clenched into fists. "Howard Blackwood is the man who acquitted the cattle barons that burned my brother's farm. He's a snake in a judge's robe, bought and paid for by every rich bastard from here to Denver." "He's worse than a snake," Emma said, her voice steady now. "He's a monster, and his son was the devil." "You said you killed him." "I did." "When? How?" Emma took a breath. The kind of breath a person takes before diving into cold water, knowing it will shock them but unable to turn back. 3 weeks ago, September 23rd, 11:15 at night. Daniel came home drunk from celebrating a court victory. He'd been drinking whiskey since 3 in the afternoon. Her voice went flat, emotionless. "He liked to drink, Caleb, and when he drank he liked to teach me lessons about being a proper wife." She began unbuttoning the high collar of her dress. "What are you doing?" Caleb asked, his voice rough. "Showing you why I can't be a wife tonight. Showing you why I had to run. Showing you that I'm not lying." She turned her back to him, let the dress slide down to her waist. Beneath it she wore a simple chemise. She lowered that too. Caleb Hartwell had seen things that would turn a lesser man's hair white. He'd seen men torn apart by grizzlies. He'd seen frostbite take fingers and toes. He'd seen the aftermath of Sioux raids. He'd buried his wife and son in the same day and not wept. But what he saw on Emma Blackwood's back made the breath hiss between his teeth. Her back was a map of agony. Old scars, silver and raised, crisscrossed her pale skin like a spider's web. Fresh welts, angry and red, overlaid the old damage. Burns, circular and deliberate. The mark of a belt buckle repeated so many times the pattern had become permanent. Near her spine, a brand of some kind healed, but hideous. It was systematic, methodical. 3 years of torture carved into flesh. "Jesus Christ," Caleb whispered. He reached out a hand stopped inches from her skin. Even his calloused fingertips, roughened by decades of work, seemed too harsh for this damaged canvas. Emma's voice came again, still flat, still emotionless, which somehow made it worse. "Daniel liked to drink every night. When he drank, he liked to remind me of my place. 3 weeks ago he came home early. The judge had ruled in favor of some mining company against a group of farmers. Daniel was celebrating." She pulled the dress back up, buttoned it with fumbling fingers, then turned to face Caleb. "He said it was time for a permanent lesson. One on my face. He came at me with the poker from the fireplace, the iron still hot. I grabbed the skillet from the stove. I swung as hard as I could. I hit him in the temple." Her eyes met Caleb's, and in them he saw something terrible. Not regret, not remorse, just exhaustion. He didn't get up. Caleb sank back into his chair. The weight of what she'd told him settled over the room like a heavy blanket. Outside, the wind howled louder. Inside, the fire crackled. And between them, that leather-bound book sat like a promise and a threat. "You killed a Blackwood," Caleb said slowly. "The judge will hunt you to the ends of the earth. He'll send Pinkertons, bounty hunters, the territorial marshals, every man with a gun and a grudge." "I know," Emma pointed at the book. "That's why I brought that." "What is it?" "Insurance. Daniel kept records, meticulous records. He was proud of them. Every bribe the judge paid, every land swindle they pulled, every hired gun they used to clear farmers off valuable property." She pushed the book toward him. "Including the men they paid to burn your brother's farm." Caleb felt as if the floor had dropped out from under him. His hand moved to the book, hesitated, then opened it. The pages were filled with neat handwriting. Dates, names, amounts. Page after page of corruption, of theft, of murder dressed up as legal proceedings. He turned to page 42. October 12, 1881. Payment to Blackwood Mining Removal Agents. $500. Purpose Squatter Removal Medicine Bow Foothills. Agents Cole Brennan, Wade Garrett. Outcome barn fire. 1 casualty. Property acquired. Caleb's hands shook. That was the week Jacob's barn burned. They'd called it lightning even though the sky had been clear. Jacob had died in that fire, burned alive trying to save his horses. Caleb had found him 3 days later, what was left of him. He closed the book carefully, as if it might explode. "Why me?" His voice came out hoarse. "Why drag me into this?" Emma's eyes pleaded with him. "I read about you in the Helena Independent. Mountain Man holds off 6 Sioux warriors at Granite Pass. Sole survivor. The article said you were the finest tracker and shot in 3 territories." She swallowed hard. "I didn't have anywhere else to go. No family the judge couldn't reach. No friends who wouldn't turn me in for the reward. There's a reward. $1,000 for my return. Alive preferably, but the judge isn't particular. $1,000. More money than most men saw in 5 years. Emma reached into her dress pocket, pulled out a small leather purse, opened it to reveal a stack of bills and gold coins. "I have $300, taken from Daniel's safe the night I killed him. It's yours, all of it. I just need to hide here until spring. Then I can get this ledger to the U.S. Marshal in Denver. Once the federal government has proof killing me becomes pointless. It would only confirm the judge's guilt." Caleb stood, walked to the door, checked the heavy bars she'd dropped into place, then walked to the gun rack above the fireplace, took down his Winchester Model 1873, checked the lever action. The well-oiled metal moved smoothly, each motion as familiar as breathing. He began loading cartridges into the tube, 15 rounds. The sound of each one sliding home was loud in the quiet cabin. Emma watched him, her face pale. "You realize they won't just come for you," Caleb said quietly. "When they track you here, they'll burn this mountain down. They'll kill me just for harboring you. They'll destroy everything within 20 miles to make a point." "I know." Her voice broke on the words. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have come. I'll leave in the morning. I'll figure out somewhere else." Caleb snapped the loading gate shut with a metallic click. He turned to face her, the rifle cradled in his arms. His face was hard, unreadable, the face of a man who'd made difficult decisions before and lived with the consequences. "You'll take the bed," he said. "I'll take the floor by the door." Emma stared at him. "What?" "I said you'll take the bed. I'll sleep here." He gestured to the space between the door and the table. "Nobody's getting through that door tonight unless they go through me first." He walked to the rocking chair, positioned it to face the entrance, sat down with the Winchester across his lap. Outside, the wind rose to a howl. Inside, firelight danced across his weathered face. "Get some rest, Emma Hartwell, because come morning we need to figure out how to keep you alive." Emma looked at him for a long moment. Then tears spilled over, tracking down her cheeks. Not the frightened tears of the broken woman on the train platform. Something different. The tears of someone who had been prepared to face the darkness alone and found against all odds an ally. She didn't speak. Words would have cheapened the moment. Instead, she nodded once, picked up her valise, and disappeared behind the bedroom curtain. Caleb sat in the firelight, watching the door, listening to the wind, feeling the weight of the Winchester on his lap. He'd told Emma she could rest, but he knew he wouldn't sleep, couldn't sleep, not tonight. He thought about Martha, wondered what she would say if she could see him now. Probably something practical. Martha had been good at practical. She'd been good at seeing the heart of things, and the heart of this thing was simple. A woman had been tortured for 3 years. She'd fought back. She'd killed her tormentor. And now she needed protection. Everything else was just details. The fire burned low. Caleb added another log, watched the flames catch and spread. He checked the Winchester's action again, more from habit than need. Outside, something moved in the darkness. Probably a deer, probably nothing. But he watched anyway, because probably wasn't good enough. Not anymore. Not with Emma Blackwood sleeping 30 feet away, not with that ledger sitting on his table containing the names of his brother's murderers. Dawn was 6 hours away. 6 hours to watch. 6 hours to think. 6 hours to prepare for whatever came next. Because something would come. Men like Judge Blackwood didn't let insults stand, didn't let family deaths go unavenged. They would come with money and guns and righteous fury. And when they came, Caleb would be ready. The night stretched on, cold and dark and infinite. In the bedroom, Emma slept fitfully, whimpering occasionally in her dreams. In the main room, Caleb kept vigil, his eyes never leaving the door, his finger never far from the trigger. The wind howled, the fire crackled, and high in the Medicine Bow Mountains 2 broken souls found themselves bound together by blood and desperation, by secrets and scars, by the simple human need to survive one more day. Outside, snow began to fall. The next 3 days passed in a strange, suspended peace. Emma woke before dawn that first morning, moving quietly through the cabin as if afraid to disturb the silence. Caleb found her at the stove preparing breakfast, eggs from the chickens he kept in a small coop behind the cabin, bacon from his smokehouse, bread she'd somehow managed to bake despite never having seen his sourdough starter before. She worked with the efficiency of someone accustomed to rising early, to having tasks completed before anyone noticed she was awake. The kind of efficiency born from years of trying to be invisible. They ate in silence. Not the uncomfortable silence of strangers, but something easier, the silence of two people who understood that sometimes words only complicated things that were already clear. After breakfast, Emma began cleaning. Not the light dusting of a woman keeping house, but a furious, almost desperate scrubbing. She attacked the floorboards with a brush and lye soap until they gleamed. She washed the windows until they sparkled. She took down the curtains, boiled them, hung them to dry in the cold morning air. Caleb watched from his chair by the fire mending a harness. "You trying to scrub through to China?" Emma paused, looked up from where she was on her hands and knees. 3 years of dirt, Mr. Hartwell. Takes effort." A beat of silence. Then Caleb's mouth twitched. "Fair enough." That night, after a dinner of rabbit stew, Emma opened the ledger. Caleb had been thinking about it all day, that book and what it contained. She turned to page 42 without prompting. "Read it to me again," he said quietly. Emma's voice was steady as she read. October 12, 1881. Payment to Blackwood mining agents $500. Purpose removal of squatters in Medicine Bow foothills. Agents Cole Brennan, Wade Garrett. She paused, then continued. Outcome barn fire. 1 casualty. Property acquired. Caleb's hand froze on the armrest of his chair. He stared into the fire, seeing not flames but memory. Jacob's face. Jacob's laugh. Jacob's children left fatherless because some judge decided water rights were worth a man's life. "That was your brother," Emma said softly. It wasn't a question. Caleb nodded slowly. "Daniel bragged about it once," Emma continued, "at a dinner party. Said Jacob Hartwell was obstinate about water rights." The judge laughed, called it necessary business. Her voice went hollow. "I was serving wine. Nobody looked at me. The maid is furniture. Furniture doesn't hear, doesn't remember." Caleb turned his head, met her eyes across the small cabin. "You carrying this book, you did more than save yourself, Emma. You brought me the names of the men who killed my kin." Something shifted between them in that moment. They were no longer protector and refugee. They were partners in a blood feud, allies bound by shared loss and the desire for justice. The third day the weather broke. The constant wind died to a whisper. Pale sunlight filtered through high clouds. Caleb decided it was time. "Come on," he said after breakfast. "Time you learned to shoot properly." He led her outside. The cold bit at exposed skin, but it was bearable. Caleb set up 6 tin cans on the fence posts near the barn, old bean cans saved for exactly this purpose. Then he brought out the Winchester. "You ever fired a rifle before?" "No, sir." "Ever fired any gun?" Emma hesitated, then nodded. "Daniel kept a .38 revolver in his desk. I shot it once in the cellar to see if I could. The kick knocked me backward into a wine rack." Caleb almost smiled at the image. "Rifle's different, more controlled. Come here." He positioned her in front of him, placed the Winchester against her shoulder. Then he stepped close, his chest against her back, his arms coming around to adjust her grip. Emma went rigid for a moment, and Caleb realized this might be the first time in years a man had touched her without violence. "Easy," he murmured. "I'm just showing you the stance. Breathe." Slowly she relaxed. He could feel her heartbeat, rapid at first, then steadying. Could feel the tremor in her hands as they gripped the wooden stock. Left hand here supporting the barrel, right hand on the grip finger outside the trigger guard until you're ready to fire. His voice was low, patient, the voice he'd once used teaching Jacob's oldest boy to fish. Cheek against the stock. Line up the front sight with the rear. Put what you want to hit right there in the middle. He guided her through the motion. Breathe out. Squeeze, don't pull. Let the rifle do the work. The Winchester cracked loud in the mountain stillness. The can jumped spinning into the snow. Emma gasped, lowered the rifle, stared at the fence. "I hit it." "You did. Now do it again." They spent 3 hours in the cold. By the end, Emma's shoulder was bruised from the recoil, her fingers numb despite gloves. But she could hit a silver dollar at 50 yards, and her hands no longer trembled when she picked up the rifle. On the way back to the cabin, Caleb stopped dead. His hand shot up, signaling Emma to freeze. She obeyed instantly, not making a sound. Caleb crouched, brushed away a thin layer of fresh snow near the woodpile. There, pressed into the older snow beneath, was a boot print, faint, nearly filled in by last night's snowfall, but unmistakable to a tracker's eye. Size 12, a distinctive crosshatch pattern on the heel. "What is it?" Emma whispered. Caleb touched the print with his bare hand. The ice was hard, crystalline. This print had been made at least 12 hours ago, maybe more. "Someone was here. Last night while we were sleeping." Emma's face went white. Who could survive out there in that storm? Caleb stood slowly, scanning the tree line. The forest was silent, but it was the wrong kind of silence. Birds should be calling. Small animals should be rustling through the underbrush. Instead, nothing. The silence of a forest holding its breath. The silence of a forest being watched. "Only one man I know tracks through a blizzard like that," Caleb said, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. "Wade Garrett." The name hung between them like a curse. Emma knew it. Everyone in 3 territories knew Wade Garrett, not a lawman, not a Pinkerton, something worse. A fixer for the cattle barons and mining companies, a man who made problems disappear. 23 confirmed kills, though the real number was probably twice that. If Wade Garrett was hunting you, you were already dead. You just didn't know it yet. 2 miles down the ridge, hidden in a ravine where the smoke from a small fire wouldn't be seen, Wade Garrett cleaned his rifle. He worked methodically the way he did everything. Strip the Winchester, check each part, clean, oil, reassemble. His hands moved with the confidence of long-practice muscle memory earned over 2 decades of hunting men. Around him, 4 other men huddled near the fire. Deputies from Helena, technically, though they wore no badges out here. Just guns and cold eyes, and the certain knowledge that Judge Blackwood paid well for results. "We should hit them tonight," said Morrison, a thick-shouldered man with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow. "While they're sleeping. It's just a mountain man and a woman." Wade didn't stop his work, didn't even look up. "No. Why wait? Every day we're out here is another day in this godforsaken cold." Now Wade raised his eyes. They were gray, the color of winter ice, and they held about as much warmth. "That mountain man held off 6 Sioux warriors at Granite Pass, alone, killed 4 of them before the other 2 ran. You think he's going to be an easy mark?" Morrison shifted uncomfortably. "We got 5 guns to his 1. We do this my way." Wade's voice was soft, but it carried an edge that made grown men flinch. "Scout the defenses. Find the weak points. Wait until he's vulnerable. Then we strike." He went back to cleaning his rifle, the conversation clearly over in his mind. But after a moment he added, "Besides, Judge Blackwood wants her alive. At first, he has questions about how his son died, about what she might have told people, about where certain documents might be." Wade smiled, though there was no humor in it. "The mountain man, though, Judge, didn't pay me to bring him back alive. Said I could do what needed doing." He held up his rifle, checked the bore against the firelight, then nodded in satisfaction. "I figure we'll give them 3 more days. Let them think they're safe. Let them get comfortable. Then we remind them that nobody runs from a Blackwood. Not ever." Back at the cabin, Caleb grabbed his coat and his rifle. "Where are you going?" Emma asked, her voice tight with fear. "To make sure he knows he's not the only hunter on this mountain. Get inside. Bar the door. Load every gun in the cabin, and I mean every one. Pistols, rifles, even the old shotgun in the loft. You know how now." "Caleb, you can't go out there alone." He turned to her, and she saw something in his face she hadn't seen before. Not anger, not fear, something colder. The face of a man who had killed before and would do it again without hesitation. "This is my mountain, Emma. Has been for 10 years. I know every tree, every rock, every animal track. Wade Garrett is good, but out here I'm better." He disappeared into the tree line, moving with a silence that seemed impossible for a man his size. One moment he was there, the next gone, as if the forest had swallowed him whole. Emma stood alone in the clearing for a moment, watching the spot where he'd vanished. Then she ran to the cabin, dropped the bar into place with a heavy thud, and began loading guns. 3 hours passed. 3 hours that felt like 3 years. Emma sat by the window with the Winchester watching, waiting, jumping at every sound. Her hands shook. Her breath came quick and shallow. She counted her heartbeats to keep from screaming. When the back door opened with a sudden bang, she nearly shot Caleb. "Easy," he said, hands up. He looked grim. Ice caked his beard. His breath came in white plumes. "Found his camp, hidden in Dead Horse Ravine about 2 miles down the south slope. He's not alone. 4 men with him. Helena deputies from the look of their gear." 5 against 1, Emma breathed. Caleb met her eyes and she saw the steel in them. 5 against 2. "You ready to use that rifle for real, Emma?" She looked at the Winchester in her hands, looked at her scarred wrists, looked at the man who had given her 3 days of peace in a lifetime of fear. She nodded. "I'm ready." They spent the next hour preparing, moving furniture to create barricades, nailing planks across the lower windows, leaving gun ports to shoot through, filling every container with water in case of fire. Caleb pulled up a loose floorboard near the stove, revealing a wooden box. Inside, 3 sticks of dynamite left over from when he'd blasted rocks to widen the trail. "Last resort," he said. "If they breach the door, we use this." "Won't it blow up the cabin?" "Rather blow up the cabin than let them take you." Emma looked at him, this man she'd known for less than a week, this stranger who was risking everything for her. "Why are you doing this?" Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he said simply, "Because it's right, and because too many people stand by and watch when they should act. I won't be one of them. Not again." They didn't have to wait long. The attack came at dawn, 6:42 in the morning, according to the clock on the mantel. Emma would remember that detail for the rest of her life. How one moment the world was gray and still, and the next it exploded into violence. No warning, no shout, no demand to surrender. Just a bullet shattering the kerosene lamp hanging by the front window. Glass exploded inward, a shower of glittering shards catching the first light of dawn. The kerosene ignited instantly, a whoosh of flame that raced across the floor before Caleb could move. He lunged for Emma, drove her down behind the heavy oak table they'd turned on its side. Then the world became thunder. A volley of gunfire erupted from the tree line. 10, 15, 20 shots in rapid succession. Bullets punched through the log walls like they were made of paper. Wood splintered, sending splinters flying. One round hit the cast iron stove with a clang that rang like a bell. Another shattered a tin plate on the table, sending fragments spinning. The sound was overwhelming, deafening. Emma had never heard anything like it, never imagined violence could be this loud, this immediate, this physical. "Stay low!" Caleb roared. "Crawl to the back window!" He scrambled to the front window, rose up just long enough to fire 2 quick shots, then dropped back down as return fire chewed up the windowsill where his head had been a moment before. "1 down!" he shouted. 4 left!" Emma crawled on her belly across the floor, the Winchester clutched to her chest. Her dress caught on something tore. She didn't care. She reached the back window, rose to her knees, positioned the rifle on the sill. Through the gun port, she could see movement. A man in a long duster coat running low toward the barn. He carried a torch, flames streaming behind him in the wind. The horses, they were going to burn thunder and ash alive. Something hot and fierce rose in Emma's chest. Not fear, not anymore. Rage, pure crystalline rage. She remembered Caleb's words. Breathe out. Squeeze, don't pull. She fired. The rifle kicked against her shoulder, a familiar pain now. Through the smoke she saw the man stumble. His legs tangled. He went down hard, face first, into the snow. The torch fell from his hand, sputtered, went out with a hiss. A spreading dark stain appeared in the white snow around him. He didn't move again. "I got him." Emma heard herself shout, her voice strange in her own ears. A mixture of horror and something else. Triumph, no, survival. The fierce joy of still being alive. "Good girl," Caleb yelled back. But there was no time to celebrate. A heavy thud shook the front door. Then another. They were using a log as a battering ram. Thud. The door held, but the crossbar cracked slightly. Thud. More splintering. "Cover me!" Caleb shouted. He stood to get a better angle on the men at the door. For one moment he was silhouetted against the window, a perfect target. The shot came from a different direction. Not a pistol. A rifle, high-powered, precise. The sound was different, sharper. Caleb spun like a puppet with cut strings. A spray of blood, bright arterial red, painted the wall behind him in a fan pattern. He collapsed, hitting the floor with a thud that shook the cabin. "Caleb!" Emma abandoned her post, scrambled across the floor to where he lay. He was conscious, but his face had gone gray, the color of old ash. His left hand clutched at his shoulder, blood pulsing between his fingers in steady jets. The bullet had hit him just below the collarbone, punching through muscle, and God knew what else. "I'm fine," Caleb gasped, trying to stand. "Get back to the window." "You're not fine. You're bleeding out." Emma tore a strip from her petticoat, pressed it against the wound. Caleb groaned a sound that came from somewhere deep and primal. She could feel his blood, hot and slick, soaking through the cloth in seconds. Thud. The door cracked further. She could see fingers reaching through the gap, trying to lift the bar. Thud. Under the floorboards. Caleb rasped his hand, gripping her wrist with surprising strength. His eyes were losing focus, pupils dilating. By the stove. Dynamite. Short fuse. Throw it out front. "If I open the door, they'll shoot me. They'll kill us anyway." He coughed and blood flecked his lips. "Do it, Emma. Trust me." Emma looked at him, this man who had given her shelter when she had nothing, who had believed her when she had no reason to be believed, who was dying because of her choices, her past, her desperation. The fear that had ruled her life for 3 years suddenly evaporated, burned away like morning fog under a hot sun. In its place, something cold and hard as diamond settled into her chest. She ran to the stove, pried up the loose board with her bare hands. 2 fingernails tore. She didn't feel it. Grabbed a stick of dynamite, red and waxy and terrifying. Grabbed a match from the tin on the mantel. Thud. Crack. The door split down the middle. A hand reached through, fumbling for the bar. Emma walked to the door, her steps steady. No trembling now. No fear. She lit the match on her thumbnail the way she'd seen Caleb do it. Touched it to the fuse. The fuse caught with a hiss, sparks shooting, burning toward the dynamite at a rate that seemed both too fast and too slow. Through the crack in the door she saw a face. Wade Garrett. The scar on his cheek was livid in the cold morning light. His gray eyes widened as he realized what she was holding. Emma's voice came out clear and strong. "Tell the judge to go to hell." She shoved the dynamite through the crack in the door right at Wade Garrett's feet, then threw herself on top of Caleb, her body covering his. The explosion was the end of the world. Sound became a physical thing, a wall of pressure that slammed into Emma's body. The door disintegrated, flying inward in 1,000 wooden splinters. Heat washed over them like a breaking wave. The floor bucked beneath them. For a moment Emma thought the entire cabin might collapse. Then silence. Ringing, absolute silence. Her ears felt stuffed with cotton. She couldn't hear anything but a high-pitched whine. She coughed, waved away smoke and dust. The front wall of the cabin had a gaping hole where the door used to be, 6 feet wide, ragged-edged. Through it she could see the clearing. The snow was black with soot and blood. 2 men lay motionless. One was definitely Wade Garrett, or what was left of him. The other she didn't recognize. Of the remaining attackers there was no sign, either dead and blown into the trees or run off. Emma looked down at Caleb. He was unconscious, his breathing shallow and rapid. The makeshift bandage was soaked through completely. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no. You don't get to die. Not now. Not after everything." She rolled off him, assessed the situation with a clarity that surprised her. The wound was still bleeding, but not as badly. The explosion had probably dropped his blood pressure, slowing the hemorrhage. That was good. That gave her time. Not much time, but enough. Maybe. Emma had never felt more alone in her life. The cabin was half destroyed. The man who'd protected her was dying on the floor. 5 men had just tried to kill them both, and she was the only thing standing between Caleb Hartwell and death. For a moment, just a moment, panic tried to take her, tried to make her small again, frightened again, helpless again. Then she heard a voice, not out loud, in her head. Her own voice, but stronger than she'd ever heard it. "He died for you. Don't let him be dead." Emma moved. First she had to get him away from the gaping hole in the wall. The cold was already pouring in, turning the cabin into an icebox. She grabbed Caleb under the arms, dug her heels into the floorboards, and pulled. He was 200 pounds of dead weight. Every muscle in her body screamed. Her back felt like it might snap, but she pulled anyway, inch by agonizing inch, dragging him across the floor until he was near the stove in the warmth. Then she had to stop the bleeding. She tore away his shirt, exposing the wound. The bullet hole was a puckered, ugly thing just below his left collarbone. She pressed her fingers gently around it, feeling for the exit wound. Nothing. The bullet was still in there, lodged somewhere inside, probably against bone. Emma sat back on her heels, fighting down a wave of nausea. She'd never done surgery, never even seen surgery, except once through a window when the town doctor had removed her neighbor's appendix. But she'd read her father's medical texts as a girl, had memorized passages about field treatment and emergency procedures back when she'd dreamed of being useful, of helping people. She remembered the basics. Stop the bleeding, remove the foreign object, close the wound, prevent infection. Simple. Impossible. Necessary. She stripped off her petticoat, tore it into wide strips, packed them against the wound, then used her full body weight to apply pressure. Caleb moaned, but didn't wake. His eyelids fluttered. His lips moved, forming silent words. Martha, the baby, the creek's rising. He was delirious. That was bad. That meant shock blood loss, probably early hypothermia from the cold now flooding the cabin. Emma looked at the hole in the wall. If she didn't seal it, Caleb would freeze to death before he bled out. She wedged the door and the stove. The cabin's heavy oak dining table overturned to block the lower half of the opening. Dragged the mattress from the bedroom, stuffed it into the upper gap. It wasn't airtight, but it cut the wind. By the time she finished, her arms felt like rubber. But there was no time to rest. She went to her valise, still sitting where she'd left it that first night. Inside, beneath her few clothes, was the small sewing kit. Emma pulled out the scissors, fine and sharp, meant for embroidery, the tweezers silver-plated for pulling threads, her mother's tools meant for delicate work. She poured whiskey over them from Caleb's bottle. Then, with hands that wanted to shake, but she wouldn't allow to shake, she poured whiskey into the wound. Caleb's back arched. A scream tore from his throat, raw and animal. His eyes snapped open, unseeing, glazed with agony. "I'm sorry," Emma whispered. "I'm so sorry, but I have to do this." She waited for him to pass out again. Then she began. The next hour was a nightmare Emma would never fully remember. Her conscious mind retreated, leaving only instinct and desperate determination. She used the scissors to widen the wound slightly, probing gently for the bullet. Blood welled up warm and slick. She wiped it away, probed deeper. Her fingers, usually so steady with a needle, trembled now. She could feel Caleb's pulse under her fingertips, rapid and thready. Could feel heat and damaged tissue and the hard edge of bone. And there finally she felt it. Metal. The bullet mushroomed from impact, wedged against his scapula. She positioned the tweezers, got them around the slug. Squeezed. The bullet slipped in the blood. No, 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 no. She wiped her hands on her dress, tried again. This time she gripped harder, pulling slowly, steadily. The bullet resisted, caught on something. She pulled harder. With a wet sucking sound, it came free. Emma held it up to the light. A .45 caliber slug, deformed beyond recognition. This tiny piece of lead had nearly ended everything. She dropped it into a tin cup with a ping, then turned her attention to closing the wound. Using the silk thread from her sewing kit thread, meant for a wedding dress she would never wear. Emma stitched Caleb's torn flesh back together. 17 stitches, each one small and precise and soaked with her tears. When she was done, she bandaged the wound with clean cloth, then collapsed beside him, exhausted beyond anything she'd ever known. But she couldn't rest. Not yet. The fever. The fever came that night and stayed for 5 days. Caleb burned with it. His temperature climbed to dangerous levels. He thrashed and moaned, crying out names Emma didn't know, reliving battles she hadn't seen. Sometimes he spoke clearly lucid for moments, asking for water or where he was. Other times he was lost in delirium, fighting invisible enemies, reaching for things that weren't there. Emma didn't leave his side. She sat beside him hour after hour, changing the cool cloths on his forehead every 10 minutes. She kept count. 432 times in the first 3 days. She dripped water into his mouth with a spoon drop by patient drop, making sure he didn't choke. She changed his bandages twice a day, checking for signs of infection. The wound looked angry and swollen, but it wasn't weeping pus. That was good. That meant she'd done something right. At night, sitting in the firelight while Caleb's fevered dreams made him whimper, Emma held his hand. She traced the calluses on his palms, the old scars on his knuckles. The hands of a man who had worked hard his entire life, the hands of a man who had killed to protect her without hesitation. "I'm here," she whispered to him over and over. "I'm not going anywhere. Don't leave me, Caleb. Please don't leave me." She thought about her wedding day 3 years ago, how young she'd been, how naive. She'd worn a dress that cost $200 imported from New York, white lace and silk. She'd felt like a princess in a fairy tale. Daniel had been so handsome in his suit, his blue eyes bright with what she'd thought was love. She remembered the moment she'd said, "I do," the moment she'd bound herself to him. How the judge had smiled, looking satisfied, as if he'd just closed a particularly good business deal, which she realized now he had. 6 months later, Daniel had hit her for the first time, over a shirt that wasn't pressed correctly. A backhanded slap that had knocked her into the wall, left her ear ringing for an hour. Then had come the flowers, the apology. "It won't happen again, darling. I'm so sorry. The whiskey made me do it, but it had happened again, and again, and again, until the apologies stopped coming and only the violence remained." Emma looked at Caleb's sleeping face, ravaged by fever, but still somehow peaceful. This man was nothing like Daniel. Nothing like any man she'd ever known. He protected but didn't possess. He supported but didn't control. He asked for nothing and gave everything. On the morning of the 4th day, with firewood running low and Caleb still unconscious, Emma made a decision. She put on Caleb's oversized buffalo coat, took the Winchester, and stepped outside for the first time since the battle. The clearing was pristine white fresh snow, having covered the bloodstains, but Emma knew they were there. Knew that beneath the beauty, violence had happened. Death had walked here. She found the bodies of the 2 men killed in the explosion, half buried in a snowdrift. Wolves or something else had been at them. She turned away, stomach churning, and focused on her task. She needed firewood. The pile Caleb kept stacked by the cabin was running low. Emma found the axe in the shed, brought it to the woodpile, and began to chop. It was harder than she'd imagined. The axe was heavy, the wood frozen solid. But she swung the blade again and again, feeling her shoulders burn, her hands blister. She counted the strokes. 47 before she'd split enough wood to last 3 days. On the way back to the cabin, arms full of firewood, she saw a snowshoe hare, white as the drifts around it, nearly invisible. It froze when it saw her nose twitching. Emma slowly, carefully set down the wood, raised the Winchester. The hare was 30 yards away. An easy shot, Caleb would have said. She breathed out, squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked. The hare kicked once and was still. Emma walked over, looked down at the animal she'd killed, felt a strange mixture of regret and necessity. This was meat. This was survival. She'd killed a man 4 days ago without hesitation to save horses. She could certainly kill a rabbit to feed the man who'd saved her life. She carried it back, used Caleb's skinning knife to dress it the way she'd watched him do with other game. Her hands shook, but she managed. By afternoon, rabbit stew simmered on the stove. That evening, Caleb's fever broke. He opened his eyes just after sunset while Emma was spooning broth into a bowl. One moment he was unconscious, the next his gray eyes were clear, focused, aware. "You're still here," he rasped. Emma turned, nearly dropped the bowl. She crossed to him in 3 quick steps, knelt beside where he lay on the pallet she'd made near the stove. "Where else would I go?" You could have run, taken the money, gone to California. His voice was weak but steady. Smart move would have been to leave me and save yourself. Emma dipped the spoon into the broth, brought it to his lips. I made a deal, Mr. Hartwell, said I'd be your wife. I don't break my contracts. She helped him eat small sips at a time. When he'd had enough, she set the bowl aside. They sat in silence for a moment, firelight painting shadows across both their faces. Then Caleb's hand came up, his fingers brushing against her cheek. His touch was gentle, tentative, as if she might break, or as if he couldn't quite believe she was real. Emma, you're not a wife I bought from an agency. You're the woman who saved my life. Emma's eyes filled with tears. Not sad tears. Something else. Something she couldn't quite name. I was so scared, she admitted, her voice breaking. When you were dying, I thought I couldn't do it. Thought I wasn't strong enough. Caleb's hand moved to cover hers. You were strong enough. You are strong enough. You're the strongest person I've ever known. The fire had burned low. James sat transfixed, hanging on every word. So Grandma saved your life, he said softly. Caleb nodded. She did more than that, boy. She became herself. Before that winter, your grandmother was a frightened girl running from monsters. After, she was the woman who stood up to Judge Blackwood and didn't blink. He poured himself another finger of whiskey, stared into the amber liquid. What happened next? James asked. Did they come back? Oh, they came back, but not how we expected. Caleb's face grew dark. Wade Garrett died in that explosion, but he wasn't the only hunter Blackwood had, and this time the judge decided to come himself, to finish what Wade started, to get his answers. He looked at his grandson. That's when things got really dangerous, because angry judges don't send more hired guns. They bring the full weight of the law. A week passed. Caleb could stand now, though he was weak, and the wound ached constantly. The man who had once carried 100-pound elk up a steep slope was now tired after walking across the cabin, but his mind was sharp, too sharp. He'd been thinking. On the 8th day after the siege, he called Emma to the table. He'd used a piece of bark and charcoal to draw a rough map of the territory. We can't stay here, he said without preamble. Blackwood knows we're alive now. Wade Garrett failed, and that failure will make the judge even more determined. Emma studied the map. So we go to Denver, to the marshal. Caleb shook his head. 300 miles through winter. We'd freeze before we made 50. No, we have to think smarter. We go back to the source. Laramie. Emma's head snapped up. That's suicide. That's exactly where he expects us. Exactly. He expects us to run to hide like rabbits. Caleb pointed to Laramie on his crude map. We do the opposite. We attack. There's a telegraph office at the train station. We wire the contents of that ledger directly to Marshal Bass Reeves in Denver. Once the federal government has proof, killing us becomes pointless. It would only confirm Blackwood's guilt. Emma saw the logic, but also the danger. And if the telegraph lines are down, Caleb met her eyes. Then we die fighting. A moment of silence. Then Emma nodded. When do we leave? December 22nd, 2 days before Christmas. They'll think we're settled in for winter, won't expect us to move. That night, after a quiet dinner, Emma sat near Caleb's chair. He reached out, pulled her closer. She rested her head against his knee, and he stroked her hair with his good hand. Caleb. Yeah. Tell me about Martha. He was quiet for so long, Emma thought he wouldn't answer. Then he began to speak, his voice low and sad. She was 25 when the fever took her. Summer of 77. Black plague, the doctor called it, though he said it too late to do any good. Our boy Thomas was only 2. He took sick the day after she died. Didn't last 48 hours. His hand tightened in Emma's hair, not painfully, just holding on. I buried them both on the hill behind the cabin, marked the graves with stones from the creek. For a long time after, I didn't want to live. Didn't see the point. What changed? Time, mostly. And the knowledge that Martha would have been furious if I'd given up. She was strong, Emma. Like you, she'd have wanted me to keep going to find purpose again. He tilted Emma's face up to look at him. I think she'd be glad you're here. Glad I'm not alone anymore. Emma's eyes filled with tears. I'm not her, Caleb. I can never be her. I don't want you to be her. I want you to be you. Emma Hartwell, the woman who threw dynamite at hired killers, the woman who cut a bullet out of my chest with sewing scissors, the woman who's teaching me that maybe it's okay to care about someone again. He leaned down, kissed her forehead gently. When this is over, when Blackwood is dealt with, I'm going to marry you proper, with a preacher and witnesses and a ring. I'm going to make you my wife in truth, not just on paper. Emma closed her eyes, let herself feel safe for the first time in years. Deal. They sat that way until the fire burned to embers, two damaged souls finding healing in each other's presence. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and silent, covering the world in white, hiding the blood, hiding the violence, hiding everything except the two people in the cabin who had decided that tomorrow would come no matter what, and tomorrow they would begin the journey back to Laramie, back to danger, back to the man who wanted them dead. But this time they wouldn't be running. This time they would be fighting back. They left 2 days before Christmas when the world was still dark and the stars burned cold and bright overhead. Caleb saddled Thunder and Ash by lamplight, his movements careful, favoring his left side where the wound still pulled. Emma packed light, dried venison, ammunition, the ledger wrapped in oiled cloth and tied with leather cord, and Daniel's .38 revolver loaded tucked into the pocket of her coat. The temperature stood at 15 degrees below zero. Their breath crystallized instantly in the air. The horses stamped and snorted vapor rising from their nostrils like dragon smoke. Once we start down, there's no turning back, Caleb said, checking the cinch on Thunder's saddle. The trail's too narrow to turn around in most places. We're committed. Emma nodded. She looked different now than she had 2 months ago on that train platform. Harder, leaner. Her honey-colored eyes held something they hadn't held before. Certainty. Let's go. They rode out as dawn broke pale and cold over the Medicine Bow Range. Behind them the cabin stood dark and empty. Ahead the trail dropped away into shadow. The descent was hell, not the dramatic hell of gunfire and explosions, but the slow grinding hell of endurance. The trail was ice in places, snow packed hard as stone in others. The horses picked their way down with agonizing care, their shoes ringing on exposed rock, slipping on hidden ice. The wind came up the mountain to meet them. Not a breeze, but a physical force trying to tear them from their saddles. It carried ice crystals that stung exposed skin like needles. Emma wrapped a scarf around her face until only her eyes showed. Even so, her cheeks went numb within an hour. They didn't speak, couldn't speak. The wind stole words before they could form. So they rode in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, focused only on staying alive, staying on the horses, staying on the trail. At Medicine Bow Pass, 10,000 feet above sea level, the wind hit 40 miles an hour. The temperature with wind chill dropped to 40 below. Emma couldn't feel her feet anymore, couldn't feel her hands despite thick gloves. The cold was a living thing, a predator patient and relentless. Caleb turned in his saddle, checked on her. His beard was white with frost. His eyes were the only warm thing in a world of ice. He pointed down, then forward. Keep going. No choice but to keep going. They descended through the afternoon. The trail wound back and forth across the mountain's face, sometimes so narrow that Emma's left leg brushed the rock wall, while her right hung over a 200-foot drop. She didn't look down, just focused on the space between Thunder's ears on Caleb's back, ahead of her, on the next breath and the next step. As darkness fell, they reached a small hollow sheltered by an overhanging rock. Caleb signaled to stop. They dismounted, legs so cold and stiff they could barely stand. Caleb dug a snow cave into a drift just big enough for both of them. They unsaddled the horses, covered them with blankets, then crawled into their shelter. The buffalo robe Emma wrapped around them both was the only thing between them and death. They huddled together, sharing body heat, shivering so violently their teeth rattled. Emma pressed against Caleb's chest. His arms came around her, holding her close. Not romantic, not passionate, just survival in its purest form. "Caleb," she whispered against his coat, "I'm scared." "Me too." "Do you think we'll make it?" His arms tightened around her. "We've made it this far, and I'd rather die with you in this snow than live without you in that cabin." In the darkness, Emma turned her face up to his, found his lips with hers. The kiss was cold at first, then warm, gentle. A promise made in darkness that maybe, just maybe, there would be light on the other side of this. When they pulled apart, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "If we survive this, Emma Hartwell, I'm going to marry you proper, with a preacher and a ring and everything you deserve. We're already married, you fool. I mean really married, where you get to wear a white dress and I don't smell like bear grease and gun oil." Despite everything, Emma smiled. "Deal." They spent that night pressed together, drifting in and out of a half-sleep that wasn't really rest, but was better than freezing. The wind howled, the cold pressed down. But they were together, and that made all the difference. Morning came gray and bitter. They emerged from their snow cave like survivors of a shipwreck, cramped and frozen, but alive. The horses had survived 2 standing with their backs to the wind, ice crusted on their manes. They rode on. By midday of the second day, they saw Laramie. The town spread across the plain below them, smoke rising from 100 chimneys. Even from 2 miles away, they could hear church bells. Christmas Eve. The world was celebrating while they prepared for war. The contrast was obscene. Down there, families gathered around fires. Children played in the snow. People sang carols and exchanged gifts and believed for one night at least in peace on earth and goodwill toward men. Up here, 2 people who had killed and nearly died rode toward a reckoning that would end in blood. They approached the town as darkness fell, sticking to the alleys behind Main Street. Caleb knew, Laramie knew which buildings backed onto which, knew where Sheriff Brennan kept his deputies posted on busy nights. "Brennan's in Blackwood's pocket," Caleb reminded Emma as they dismounted in the shadows behind the livery stable. "We see any badge we run." They left the horses with old Jack Morrison, who ran the stable and owed Caleb a favor from years back. Jack's eyes widened when he saw the hard edge in their faces, the way they moved like hunted things. "Don't want to know," Jack said, taking Thunder's reins. "But I'll keep them ready. You need to leave fast, you whistle. I'll have them saddled." "Obliged," Caleb said. They moved through the alleys on foot. The sounds of Christmas washed over them, laughter from saloons, singing from the church at the end of Main Street, children's voices calling to each other in some game involving snow and joy. Emma felt each sound like a knife. How could the world be so normal when hers was ending? How could people laugh and sing when she was walking toward possible death? But she kept moving, one foot in front of the other, the weight of the revolver in her pocket, the weight of the ledger in Caleb's coat, the weight of everything they'd survived pressing them forward. The train station sat at the far end of town, a large wooden structure painted yellow, now gray in the fading light. Through the frosted windows they could see a single figure inside. A young man barely out of boyhood slumped at the telegraph desk. "That's Ben Carter," Caleb whispered. "Jack's nephew. Good kid. Won't give us trouble if we don't give him reason." They slipped inside. The warmth hit them immediately, almost painful after the cold. The stove in the corner radiated heat. Ben jerked awake at the sound of the door knocking his spectacles askew. "We're closed, folks. Christmas Eve. Come back tomorrow and I'll send whatever you need." His voice died as Caleb stepped into the lamplight. Ben Carter had heard the stories. Everyone in Laramie had heard about the mountain man who'd held off 6 Sioux warriors at Granite Pass, but stories and reality were different things. Caleb Hartwell in the flesh was terrifying, over 6 feet of weathered muscle and hard eyes. His beard was still crusted with ice. His buffalo coat was stained with old blood. He moved with the certainty of a man who had killed before and would do it again. "Oh God," Ben whispered. Caleb walked to the door, turned the lock. The bolt sliding home sounded very loud in the small space. "I need you to open the telegraph line, Ben." "I can't." "The storm brought down the wires. I can't send anything." Caleb crossed the room in 3 strides. He didn't draw a weapon, didn't need to. He simply leaned over the counter, and Ben Carter nearly fell backward off his stool. "I can hear the battery hum, son. The line is live. Now you can sit down and help us, or I can tie you up and do it myself. Your choice." Ben's eyes darted to the wall behind him. Emma followed his gaze. There, tacked prominently next to the train schedule, was a poster. "Wanted dead or alive. Caleb, Mountain Man, Hartwell. $1,000. Reward murder, kidnapping, arson, by order of Judge Howard Blackwood." Below it a crude sketch that looked enough like Caleb to be recognizable, and below that a description of Emma. Female accomplice, 22 years old, brown hair, honey-colored eyes, armed and dangerous. Emma stepped forward into the light. Ben's eyes widened further. "I'm not kidnapped," she said quietly. "I'm here by choice, and we're not murderers, but we will become them if you don't help us." She pulled the ledger from inside her coat, set it on the counter with a heavy thud. "This book contains proof that Judge Blackwood is the real criminal. Bribery, fraud, murder, all documented in his own son's handwriting. We need to wire the contents to Marshal Bass Reeves in Denver. Once the federal government has this information, they'll come for Blackwood, not us." Ben stared at the book, at Emma, at Caleb. The mathematics of the situation were simple. Help them and possibly face charges later. Don't help them and possibly die now. He sat down at the telegraph key. "What do you want me to send?" Emma opened the ledger to page 52. The pages fell open easily. She'd been here before, had marked it with a torn strip of fabric. "Start here. Send everything on this page, word for word, to Marshal Bass Reeves, Denver Federal Building. Mark it urgent." Ben's fingers found the key, started tapping. Click, clack, click, clack. The sound was rhythmic, almost hypnotic. Emma stood behind him, reading over his shoulder, making sure he transmitted accurately. Caleb positioned himself by the window, watching the street. The church service was ending. People poured out of the building, bundled in coats and scarves, calling Merry Christmas to each other. "Faster," Caleb said quietly. "I'm going as fast as I can," Ben protested. "These codes are complicated." Click, clack, click, clack. Emma turned the page. Then another. 3 pages transmitted, 4, 5. Then the clicking stopped. Not slowed. Stopped. Complete silence. "Why did you stop?" Emma demanded. Ben's face had gone white. "I didn't. The circuit just cut. Someone severed the line from outside." The words hung in the air. Outside, the sounds of Christmas continued oblivious. Inside, 3 people stared at each other, understanding what this meant. Then, into the silence came a sound. Slow, deliberate applause. Clap, clap, clap. The front door didn't burst open. It unlocked from the outside, the bolt sliding back with a well-oiled click. Someone had a key. Someone owned this building. The door swung open. Standing in the threshold, framed by the yellow light of street lamps and the white of falling snow, was Judge Howard Blackwood. He didn't look like a monster. That was the first thing Emma thought. He looked like someone's grandfather, a man of 58 years, well-preserved, distinguished. He wore a black wool coat with a velvet collar, a silk cravat at his throat, a bowler hat that he removed as he entered, revealing hair more silver than black, neatly trimmed. In one gloved hand he carried a gold-tipped walking cane. In the other, a Colt .45 with a pearl handle. Behind him, 6 men filed into the station. Not deputies. These weren't men who wore badges. They wore long coats to hide shotguns. They had the flat eyes of professional killers, hired guns who would do anything for money and ask no questions. The judge stepped inside, closed the door behind him. The sound of it shutting was very final. "Merry Christmas, children," he said. His voice was cultured, refined, the voice of education and breeding. "I must say I'm impressed. You made it further than Daniel predicted you would." Emma's voice came out steady, which surprised her. Daniel was a fool and a coward. Something flickered across the judge's face. Just for a moment, the mask of civility cracked. Rage, red and raw, showed through. Then it was gone, replaced by that grandfatherly smile. "You killed my son, Emma, my only heir, the boy I waited 23 years to have. Your son was a monster who beat me for 3 years while you watched and did nothing. He was my son, my blood, my legacy." The judge's voice hardened. "And you took him from me with a kitchen implement like he was nothing more than vermin to be put down." Caleb stepped forward, putting himself between Emma and the 6 shotguns. "Your son got what he deserved, same as you're going to get." The judge's eyes shifted to Caleb. Recognition flickered. "Ah, yes, the mountain man. Mr. Hartwell, isn't it I remember your brother, Jacob? He screamed quite loudly when his barn went up. Did you know that the men I hired told me he was calling for his children as the smoke took him?" Caleb's hand moved toward his coat. All 6 shotguns racked simultaneously. The sound was very loud in the small space. "Tisk, tisk," the judge said. "Let's not be messy. Not in the station. I own this building. I'd hate to ruin the floorboards." He extended his gloved hand toward Emma. "The book, my dear. Give me the ledger and I'll make this quick. A hanging in the morning. Public, dignified. You'll be remembered as a tragic figure driven mad by grief. I might even allow a proper burial. And if I don't, then my men will burn this station to the ground with all of you inside it. A tragic Christmas accident, a coal stove malfunction. These things happen." Emma looked at Caleb. They were trapped, outgunned. The telegraph line was dead. The gamble had failed. After everything they'd survived, everything they'd endured, it was ending here in a train station on Christmas Eve. Caleb's shoulders sagged. His voice, when he spoke, was defeated. "Give it to him, Emma." She stared at him. "What? Give him the ledger. It's over. We tried. We failed. It's not worth dying for." "Caleb, no, after everything." "I said give it to him." His voice cracked. "I won't watch you burn. Won't watch them hurt you. Just give him what he wants." Emma looked at him for a long moment, looked into those steel-gray eyes, and saw something there, just a flicker, a slight shift of weight to his back foot, a tension in his jaw that wasn't defeat, but preparation. She understood. Emma picked up the ledger. It felt heavy in her hands. All those names, all that proof, all those lives destroyed, documented in neat columns of ink. She walked slowly toward the judge. "You win," she whispered. She held the book out. The judge's smile widened. He lowered his pistol slightly, reaching with his free hand to take his prize. "Smart girl. You always did know your place in the end." Emma's fingers touched his glove, and she spoke, her voice clear and cold. "My place is standing over your grave." She dropped, not fell, dropped, threw herself flat on the dusty floor, yanking the ledger down with her. In the split second that the judge's eyes followed her movement, in the split second that 6 pairs of hired gun eyes tracked downward, the air in the station disintegrated. Caleb didn't reach for the Colt at his hip. He reached inside his coat, found the loop of rope he'd tied there 3 days ago. The sawed-off 10-gauge shotgun he'd carried hidden against his ribs since they left the cabin. He pulled. The weapon came up. Both hammers were already cocked. He fired. The sound was apocalyptic. The double-barreled blast, both barrels at once, hit Judge Howard Blackwood square in the chest from 6 feet away. The impact lifted the old man off his feet, threw him backward into his hired guns like a rag doll caught in a tornado. He didn't scream, didn't have time. One moment he was standing. The next he was flying already dead blood, and worse, spraying in a wide arc. Chaos erupted. The hired guns, blinded by smoke, and the sudden loss of their employer, fired wildly. Buckshot shredded the ticket booth. The wall behind the counter exploded in a shower of splinters. Ben Carter screamed, dropped under his desk, covered his head with his hands. Caleb was already moving. He threw the empty shotgun aside, drew his Colt, and fired 3 times in rapid succession. 2 of the hired guns went down, one clutching his throat, the other his chest. The remaining four scrambled for cover behind the passenger benches. Return fire chased Caleb as he dove behind the heavy oak counter. Bullets chewed through wood, sending splinters flying. "Emma, back door, go!" She scrambled on hands and knees across the floor, the ledger clutched to her chest. Caleb provided covering fire, popping up long enough to shoot, then dropping back down as the hired guns returned fire. Emma reached the back door, threw the bolt, yanked it open. Cold air rushed in. She tumbled out onto the loading platform just as Caleb ran after her, firing blind behind him. They hit the platform at a dead run. Gunfire followed them, bullets chipping wood. One round passed so close to Emma's head she felt the displacement of air. Then she heard it. A train whistle, long and mournful. A freight train was pulling out of the yard, heading south toward Cheyenne and eventually Denver. It was already moving, picking up speed, the heavy steel wheels grinding sparks from the rails. "The train!" Emma shouted. They ran. Behind them, the three surviving hired guns burst through the back door, raising their weapons. Ahead, the train continued to accelerate. The gap between them and escape was closing. Emma reached the last boxcar first. She grabbed the iron ladder with both hands. The cold metal burned her palms even through gloves. She pulled herself up, feet scrambling for the bottom rung. Behind her, Caleb was falling behind. His hand clutched his left side. The wound had torn open from the exertion. Blood soaked through his coat. His face was gray with pain. "Emma!" he shouted. "Go! Don't wait! No!" She hooked one leg through the brake wheel on the car's deck, leaned out over the gap between the train and the platform. "Grab my hand!" Caleb lunged. His fingers caught the bottom rung of the ladder. The train was moving faster now, pulling him along. His boots dragged on the gravel ballast. He tried to pull himself up, but his strength was failing. The wound, the cold, the blood loss. It was too much. His grip started to slip. "No!" Emma screamed. She leaned further out, reaching down with both hands. "Caleb, take my hand." Their eyes met. In his, she saw resignation. In hers, he saw absolute refusal to accept his death. He swung his free hand up. Their fingers locked. Emma pulled with everything she had, every ounce of strength in her small frame. She felt something in her shoulder tear, didn't care, pulled harder. Caleb's boot found the bottom rung. He heaved himself up with a roar of agony, swinging his leg onto the deck. Together they collapsed onto the metal grating, gasping hearts, pounding lungs, burning. The train picked up speed. Clack, clack, clack. The rhythm became steady, comforting. The lights of Laramie faded behind them, swallowed by distance and falling snow. They lay there for a long moment, too exhausted to move. Then Caleb started to laugh. It began as a wheeze grew into something deeper. He laughed like a man who had just survived the impossible. "We lost the book," he gasped between laughs. "It's on the station floor." Emma sat up slowly. Her whole body hurt. She reached into her coat, pulled out a sheaf of papers. 47 pages folded, crumpled, but intact. "I tore out the pages." Caleb stared at her. "What?" "While Ben was typing the header information, I was tearing, page by page, every record that mattered, the bribes, the murders, the land swindles, all of it." She held up the papers, letting him see. "This is what we sent over the wire before it cut. This is what Marshal Reeves received." "So what did the judge die for?" Emma's smile was cold and satisfied. "A list of grocery expenses from 1882, and a recipe for cornbread, and the leather binding." Caleb lay back, staring up at the dark sky. Snow was falling, landing on his face, melting on his skin. Then he reached up, pulled Emma down, and kissed her. Hard, fierce. The kiss of two people who had walked through fire and come out the other side. When they pulled apart, he whispered against her lips, "Emma Hartwell, remind me never to play poker with you." "Deal." She rested her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. Strong, steady, alive. The train carried them south into darkness, toward Denver, toward justice, toward a future neither had dared imagine 2 months ago. The fire had burned down to embers. James sat on the porch rail, unable to move, unable to speak. The story had grabbed him and wouldn't let go. "So you got the information to the marshal," he said finally. Caleb nodded. Bass Reeves launched a federal investigation within a week. They arrested 14 men, including Sheriff Brennan, cleaned up corruption in 3 territories. The Blackwood Empire collapsed. Everything the judge had built came down because his son kept meticulous records and Emma was brave enough to use them. "And you two? What happened to you?" "We never went back to Wyoming. Too many ghosts, too much blood. We came here instead, bought this land with the money Emma had taken from Daniel's safe, built this ranch, started over." James looked at his grandfather, really looked at him, saw the scars, the limp he tried to hide, the way his left shoulder sat slightly lower than his right from that old wound. "Were you scared when you went to Laramie?" "Terrified, every step of the way. But fear is good, James. Fear keeps you alive. It's what you do despite the fear that defines you." Caleb stood joints protesting. He walked into the house, returned with the old wooden box. From it he pulled a Winchester rifle, Emma's rifle, the one he'd taught her to shoot with all those years ago. "This was your grandmother's. I want you to have it, for when you go to war." James took the rifle reverently. "Remember what I taught you. Breathe out. Squeeze, don't pull. And remember that the people worth fighting for are worth surviving for." Behind them, the door opened. Emma stepped out onto the porch. 58 years old now, her hair silver, but her honey-colored eyes still bright and fierce. She walked with a slight limp legacy of that night on the train when she'd torn something in her hip, pulling Caleb up. She came to stand beside her husband, and he put his arm around her waist. They looked out at the ranch they'd built together, at the life they'd fought for and earned. "You told him the story," Emma said, "not a question. He needed to hear it, before he goes." Emma looked at her grandson, saw the fear in his eyes that he was trying to hide. "The war will be hard, James. You'll see terrible things, do terrible things, but you'll survive. You're a Hartwell. We survive." The sound of hooves on the long drive made Caleb look up from the porch. He was 75 now, his beard fully white, his body worn but still strong. Beside him, Emma sat in her rocking chair, a quilt across her lap. A rider crested the hill, young, wearing a military uniform, though the war had been over for years. He rode well confidently. As he drew closer, Caleb's old eyes recognized him. James. The young man dismounted in the yard. He looked different, harder, older than 21 had any right to look. A scar ran down his left cheek, but his eyes were clear alive. Caleb stood, walked down the steps. Emma followed. They met their grandson in the yard and wrapped him in their arms. "You made it back," Caleb said, his voice thick. "I did. Your lessons kept me alive, Grandpa. Breathe out. Squeeze, don't pull." "I'm glad." James pulled back, reached into his coat, and pulled out a photograph. A young woman with dark hair and eyes that sparkled with intelligence and courage. "Her name is Marie. I met her in France. She's strong, like Grandma." Emma took the photograph, studied it, smiled. "Then you chose well. I want to bring her here, if that's all right, make a life on the ranch, raise a family." Caleb and Emma looked at each other. A whole conversation passed between them in that glance. All the years, all the struggles, all the love they'd built from ashes and blood. "This land is for family," Caleb said. "Family we're born to, family we choose, family we fight for. Bring her home, James." That evening, 3 generations of Hartwells stood on the porch watching the sun set over the Colorado Valley. Gold light painted the mountains. Cattle grazed in the distance. Smoke rose from the chimney of the home Caleb and Emma had built with their own hands. Caleb put his arm around his wife. She leaned into him the way she had for 41 years. And he thought about that frightened woman on the train platform in Laramie, about the journey that had brought them here, about all the people they'd lost and all the people they'd saved. "We made it," Emma whispered. "Emma, we did. Think we'll see more great-grandchildren?" Caleb smiled. "I reckon we will. This family's got strong roots now. They'll last long after we're gone." As darkness fell over the ranch, the lights in the windows glowed warm and welcoming. Inside, a family gathered. Outside, the land stretched forever, endless and free. Emma Hartwell, who had once been too frightened to look a man in the eye, had built all this, had survived, had fought, had loved, had won. And as the stars came out one by one like candles being lit in heaven, she closed her eyes and smiled. Because in the end, despite everything the world had thrown at them, despite the violence and the fear and the long cold winters, she and Caleb had found what everyone searches for and so few ever find. They had found home. They had found each other. They had found peace. And that in the end was worth every mile of the journey.